All right, here we go. It's another morning. I have no idea where I stand in terms of uploads right now because I have not been keeping up with them. I also stopped editing them. They were never a very largely edited product anyway. I would only ever edit the audio and then upload it. But I kind of discovered, I was like, well, when I do that, I'm really just kind of wasting my time, when at that point I should just upload the entire video with no editing, no nothing, and see where that goes. So I've been doing that, which of course means my count is off. I used to know roughly whereabouts I stood in the amount of videos I've recorded. And that was probably the best part of knowing, of doing the editing and stuff. But I've reached a point now, like I've said before, where I've caught up with myself. And in order to stay ahead of things, I really just need to be able to crank out videos. And I have not been able to do that. And I'm just generally reaching this point in my working world where like something is going to break because the very act of me working is becoming all consuming. And this is the kind of existence that I built myself around to protect. This is all really just part of a larger conversation that I will probably make a separate video about. That's not what I intended to talk about right here in this space, but it is also what is presently on my mind because it is very much so affecting a large portion of a lot of things. And like I maybe was home for a total of an hour and a half last night before I went to bed. And that's because I gotta wake up so early this morning because we hired somebody in new and we planned for them to do some things, but no one is available to train them, so I've got to do that. So I'm now going to shift my hours, and if I'm being honest with myself, I probably won't get off any earlier than I normally do. So basically I'm just coming into work 2 hours earlier. I'm not really shifting my hours at all. But at any rate, I wanted to talk about nostalgia and the idea of people yearning for times past. And I watched this video about someone, a younger person who's a member of Gen Z, and he's maybe 19 now, 18, 19, somewhere around there. And like he doesn't have much a catalog of nostalgia to really even pull from, but he's making this observation on it and about how nostalgia affects people and why people feel the way they do about nostalgia. And I always feel like nostalgia is a wonderful thing, but it is kind of a fickle demon in the sense that a lot of people yearn for a simpler time, and it's not so much that the time itself was any simpler as much as you yourself were simpler. Like, I think the sign of someone who yearns for the past is like the sign of a successful childhood. That means your parents were able to shield you enough from the evils of the world that it's something that you yearn for. And there's no doubt that one's childhood is incredibly formative in the individual and the being that they become. And so to misrepresent that is to do a disservice, but it also causes this longing, this yearning to return to what was. And And I don't think that for anybody, nostalgia isn't necessarily always a childhood thing. I think that's the most common version of it, but I feel like there's a large amount of people, it feels evil saying this, but I feel like there's probably a decent amount of parents who yearn for a time that was before that they had children. And like they wish they could, even just for a day, go back to the times like that. And it's hard to live in the moment. That's what a lot of people will say, and they'll make it their motto and all of these things. And it's really difficult to live in the moment, especially when things are going particularly rough. Like, things are not going your way. It's very hard to face that. And instead, people want to return to a simpler time. And there has been some major changes in the world in recent history as well, like the invention of the internet and all that it has brought to the world today is something that is a significant change. But like, unless you're someone who just does not use the internet, it's very hard for me to buy that like you would be so completely happy and unaffected by a time where it doesn't exist anymore. Like, I wouldn't mind going back to that time, but if I took my present day self and went back to a time where the internet didn't exist, that would take some adjusting, and there's no way really around that. That's just the factual portion of what I'm kind of getting at here, is things change, and we yearn to go back to what was, but we don't truly know what was, if that makes any sense at all. Life as a child is a very different experience than life as an adult. And it may not be so much that you want to go back to the 90s as much as it is that you just want to be a child again. You want someone else to shoulder the burden of all the stresses, terrible things that you face presently, instead of having to shoulder that burden yourself. And like, I've always said that the past is a great place to visit. Just be careful not to stay too long. It's very nice to go down memory lane and to look at pictures and videos and things from the past that will take you back there, if only for a little bit. And it's really good time to go down memory lane with other people, with friends, family, what have you. But to do so too much, or indefinitely so, or to allow your obsession with the past to hinder your experience here in the present, that's when it starts to get dangerous. And I know a lot of people who cling to the past and the way that things were, and it's like, okay, but like, that's not the way that things are. And at some point in time, you have to let go and you have to face that. And if you don't, then you just ruin however many years of life you have left in you, because you just spend your whole time grasping at something that may not have. Like, you were not an adult in the 90s, you were not an adult in the 2000s, you were a child, and yearning to go back to those days is not necessarily the right way to be. And there are some people who yearn to go back to their young adult years for the sheer fact of they were a younger person back then and they prefer those times. But again, it's all for like a fickle reasoning. Time is ever marching forward, and we cannot allow ourselves to get caught in like the backdraft of that march. Like, if time is a bubble that moves like this, and everything that's too far ahead gets penalized, and everything that's too far behind gets penalized. You got to find a way to live and exist in the middle of the bubble, instead of being way in the back and getting penalized, or being way in the front and being penalized. Living in the moment is a phrase that people throw around, and I don't know that it's entirely possible to always live in the moment and to appreciate the moment that you are in. I think there's moments in life that exist that we can appreciate, and there's moments in life that we tend to miss out on because we're so stuck in the day-to-day. And like, when you have a routine, and your life is a routine, there will be things that you will miss, because like this year alone, how many days have gone by that I have completely just forgotten, or were so insignificant that it's like they didn't even happen. And like the fallacy or philosophy, I think that's the word I'm looking for, the philosophy of living in the moment, living each day as though it was your last, is very much so a hyperbole. Like, one cannot live every day as though it was their last day, because I wouldn't have a job. I certainly wouldn't be working, and I would just be doing whatever the heck I want to do. But like, the reality of things is, like, you need to be able to make money in order to live. Now, if I had already made my millions in life, I don't even know that I need millions. Like, if I had just made like $2 million, then I wouldn't need to work for a living anymore. And then maybe I could live each day like it was my last. And that's what, it's ironic that it's always the wealthy and successful people who like to throw that phrase around, because they have the ability to do that, because they are in the financial situation that they are in. And I'm not saying that that's entirely undeservingly so, but what I am saying is it's almost a slap in the face to tell the working class, oh, just live every day like it's your last, when it's like, I can't afford to do that. Like, that's not a reality that I can afford to live in. And so it's just incredibly unfortunate that we find ourselves constantly struggling between living in the moment and getting caught up in the past and in nostalgia. And it's interesting hearing younger generations experience this, and like experiencing it for the first time. I am probably the youngest, like, I'm not trying to say that me as an individual is the youngest millennial, but like, of the millennial generation, people born in 95, I think that's like the end of the millennials. So like, my birth year is like the last of the millennials. So I'm like the youngest of the millennials. And the millennials are no longer like the youngest adult generation. They have Gen Zs are starting to come out as adults now, and that is, it's kind of funny when I say it like that. It makes it sound like they're coming out like of the closet or something, but no, they're just like, they're growing up and they're becoming adults. And these Gen Z people are now the youngest working adults in society, and we as millennials are starting to move on to that next stage. It was interesting, I was at a conference for my work, and there was a lot of highfalutin players there. Everybody was either a manager or a director or some very big role, and all of those people were in the same age range. We were in our late 20s, early 30s, and so it felt very much so like the millennial takeover of the workforce had begun, as these Gen Xers kind of moved their way out. And then now the people that we will hire and groom will be Gen Zs. But it's interesting. I've been watching a lot more content by these younger people just because it's interesting to see them experiencing the same things that I experienced as a younger individual, and understanding that it is a universal experience. And the Gen Xers probably had a drastically different experience than we did, because you can measure time by major events that shaped the world. And like, I feel like at this point we have AD and BC, and you could probably do another one now where it's like after the internet. And like, before we had the internet, we had all this stuff, and life was one way, and now that it's here, it's completely been upended. And so Gen Xers probably have a different take on nostalgia and the coming of age and accepting oneself in the working world. But I'm also willing to bet that despite it all, they still had the same experiences we did. It's just that nostalgia for them was far less accessible than it is for us. We can literally just pop in a YouTube video and watch anything from our childhood that we want to, and to a degree some of them probably can too. But when they were coming of age, it wasn't that easy to just go back in time and pretend like you were a child again, because being a child back then was not as accessible as it is now. But it's just an interesting observation on nostalgia and how it affects people and how we perceive it versus the reality of things. And like I said, I think it comes down to being a sign of a successful childhood. If nostalgia makes you feel as though the world was perfect, then you were shielded from those things as a child. And so I guess go parents who raise children that can look back in time and feel that it was so much better than what it is now. At any rate, thanks for stopping by. It's been a bit of a couple weeks here. It's not gotten any better, and it doesn't look like it will. So I guess we'll see. But thank you.